ABC News has just obtained exclusive video of the Kabul airport now abandoned after U.S. troops left the country. The images show rows of abandoned Humvees and other equipment and a strangely quiet scene in contrast to the chaos of the past 2 weeks. Senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez joins me now for more. Louis, what happens to our weapons, our vehicles, our aircraft, the equipment, all that stuff now in Taliban hands? Is there any plan to recover or destroy that arsenal?
Diane, most of that equipment was incapacitated. It was rendered inoperable. The term that General Frank McKenzie from the U.S. CENTCOM used yesterday was it was demilitarized. That means that they did something to make it inoperable in terms of its technologies. I saw some of the aircraft that they left behind. What they've done is they've rendered the consoles, they smashed them to bits so that they couldn't be used. They left behind some other, that high-tech anti-rocket system, the CRAM. They did something on the ground so that it would not be used by the Taliban as well. We're seeing images there of some of the aircraft. They had an A-29 Super Tucano. This was a propeller plane that was used by the Afghan Air Force, provided by the United States. Something has been done so that that plane cannot be flown again. So in terms of the numbers that we were provided yesterday by General McKenzie with CENTCOM, it was 70 MRAPs. Those are those large armored vehicles that protect against roadside bomb explosions, 27 Humvees, and 73 aircraft that range from helicopters that were used by the State Department to ferry their personnel across the country to those the Tucanos that I was talking about. So a wide range of mix, but what the United States did here was they ensured that they would be inoperable so that the Taliban could not be used and cannot use them. That's not the case with the American equipment that was supplied to the Afghan military that Martha mentioned in her piece. Lots of that has now gone into Taliban hands. Some of it may not work. Parts of it will, particularly the vehicles. There were tens of thousands of Humvees and Ford Ranger trucks that were provided to the Afghan military over the last 2 decades. One other thing, though, there were about 50 aircraft from the Afghan Air Force that were flown to Uzbekistan. They were not going to be returned to the Taliban.
Now, Jake Sullivan says the administration is committed to getting the remaining Americans, they're estimating 100 to 200, out of Afghanistan. How is that going to happen?
Well, the plan is the engagement with the Taliban up to a point. The Taliban had made commitments to the United States, and Sullivan said that the United States is going to hold them to those commitments, that once the airport in Kabul is reopened, with the departure of the American aircraft yesterday, the U.S. was in charge of the air traffic control of the airport, the landing and the takeoffs. That's no longer the case. So the Taliban is going to have to figure out a way to do that. They had reached out to Qatar and to Turkey to make arrangements to make that feasible. Once that happens, it's likely, we heard this from Secretary Blinken yesterday, that the hope is that that will enable charter aircraft to arrive at the airport to take away these American citizens who may still want to go. As we heard from Sullivan, these are individuals, about 100 of them to 200, who are dual nationals. That means they're Afghans who also have American citizenship. For whatever reason, they wanted to leave, but then made that ultimate choice not to, either because of security, family reasons. It's a whole variety of reasons, but ultimately, the opportunity is being made for them to leave now that the Taliban is in control of the airport. But it remains to be seen if the Taliban is actually going to hold up to that commitment.
So what will the Pentagon's role be going forward as this mission shifts from a military one to a diplomatic one?
Well, that's the key point. It's the shift from military to diplomatic. American officials yesterday were very, very clear that they have no more role inside Afghanistan. The U.S. military is effectively done when it comes to the operational role on the ground. They have nothing, no more equipment inside there that they can use. But what they are going to maintain is this over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability. This just means that they're going to be able to monitor terrorist activity potentially, and try to do so from through drone aircraft, try to do it gather through intelligence, and if they pick up notions that there is some kind of a terror attack that's being brewed against the United States, then they will launch drone strikes. Pretty similar to what we saw on Friday, the day after that deadly bombing at the airport in Kabul that killed 13 American service members. We saw there was a drone strike that killed an ISIS planner. That is potentially what the U.S. is going to be doing from now on inside of Afghanistan. But in terms of getting people out, this is going to be a diplomatic effort. It's not going to involve the military whatsoever.
And the top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee said on ABC News Live Prime last night that he's concerned Afghanistan will turn into a safe haven for terrorists under the Taliban. Take a listen.
They couldn't stop ISIS even under the circumstances right now. So how are they going to be able to stop it going forward if they want to? And if they don't want to, we got a real problem. Let's not forget there's another group there that has been laying pretty quiet right now, but is ready to metastasize again, and that's Al Qaeda, who Taliban refuses to tamp down and refuses to go against. So it stands to reason that every possible scenario that you see going forward is that this is going to return to a more of a terrorist safe haven, or the world headquarters of terrorism, if you will.
So, Louis, how much more vulnerable are we to terrorist organizations without an active presence in Afghanistan?
Well, Diane, it's more than just not having an active presence inside Afghanistan. It's not having a government that is willing to provide us intelligence on the ground. A part of the plan for the counterterrorism missions after the United States left was that there would be an active democratic government inside Afghanistan with its own intelligence apparatus, and that the U.S. would be able to continue to share intelligence to figure out whether there were, in fact, these groups, ISIS, Al Qaeda, whether they were planning attacks against the United States. I spoke earlier about the drone strikes and maybe overhead intelligence, but that's going to be it, because unless we have covert action inside, which is also a possibility, the biggest draw, the biggest flow of information for the United States intelligence was information being gathered on the ground by Afghans working with Afghan intelligence services. So that is going to be a limiting factor. And so, as the congressman said here, there is deep concern that this could become another safe haven. And you kind of heard that yesterday from General McKenzie. He talked about how when the Taliban, when they pushed towards Kabul, what they did was they opened up the prisons. Well, according to McKenzie, there were 2,000 hardcore ISIS fighters who are now out there and will probably regroup and plan further activities. And so that is a deep concern. So to the congressman's point, there is the concern about ISIS, but with the Taliban back in control, will they really hold up to that earlier commitment not to work with Al Qaeda? That's another of the many unanswered questions that remain to be answered here, really. And only time will tell whether the Taliban really is different and will hold up to that commitment.
Now, thousands of refugees have been taken to U.S. military bases around the world with this withdrawal. How long will they stay, and where will they go?
No, that's a really good question, Dan. We're talking about 123,000 people that were airlifted outside of Kabul. The vast majority of those were Afghan civilians. We're talking about Afghans who were already in the pipeline to get those special immigrant visas because they had worked as interpreters with the United States. They brought along their families. There were other people who were what the U.S. military described as Afghans at risk. They maybe didn't work directly with the United States, but they were maybe worked with non-governmental organizations. They worked in the government. Something along those lines. Those people do not have the SIVs. That's the acronym for the special immigrant visas. So now they're going to have to be processed as refugees. That could take time. That could take maybe a year, maybe 2 years for these individuals. The people who had those visas in hand, they are being flown to these bases overseas, both in the Middle East and in Europe. And from there, the process has already begun of flying them into the United States. They will be temporarily housed in some military bases. Capacity is going to be up to maybe 50,000 over the next couple of weeks. But the goal is that those people, as they leave, as they get acclimated, and they will be finding sponsors and they'll go off into society. But those other people who were not in the pipeline, who have to get started with the refugee paperwork, it's possible that they could be in those countries in the Middle East and in Europe for a couple of years, depending on how long that process takes. The military is prepared to house them temporarily. Then it's going to be up to arrangements that have been made with dozens of countries about housing them in the future so that they're not housed on these bases.
All right, senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez. Louis, thank you.